Ishan, yes, Hibernate and Spring, unleash the magic. Before we start, I want to run a quick poll with you, just to see how it sees on your side. So you should see a poll right now. For how long have you been using Hibernate? I'm really curious about this. Is it okay? More than 2, and just a couple of more seconds, and I got the idea. I got the idea. I will close the poll. I got the polls right, and let's share the screen. Good. So it will be hard. It would be hard. And let's see. So first to introduce myself, that's fair. My name is Rentea. I'm a Java champion. I founded the Bucharest Software Craftsmanship community that I will also invite you to join. We are one of the largest communities of developers in Romania. The link is in the chat. I've done more than 100 events myself there. Webinars engaging with a lot of discussions, a lot of ideas. Have a look, join. It's always very fun, completely free. It's in your chat right now. Then I have a website. By the way, in case you wonder what the heck is software craftsmanship, it's focused on simple design, refactoring, and unit testing. That's the goal of this community, to have a place where to share these ideas relating to these topics. I have a website with talks, a blog, and some video courses you can find there. Yes, the session is recorded, so you can watch the recording afterwards. It's usually useful in my sessions. I do trainings, and as you can see already, as you know already, insane trainings. 8 years of doing that, hundreds of days, 200 since the pandemic, and now doing this every single day. These are my topics, Spring, Hibernate, and today we will see a combination of these two, exactly where the sparkles are in between, wherever the magic happens. Yes. Functional programming, reactive programming, performance, pragmatic domain-driven design. Oh, how good this one sounds. Refactoring, test-driven. I just did a TDD training today, just before that. So if you want to know more about me, if you want to enroll a training, I do stuff on Teachable. I will also have recorded materials there. Or if you want to reach me out, of course, the best way is Twitter. We are developers. Good. So let's do this. As we mentioned, please ask any question at any point. I will keep an eye on the chat. Good. Just before we even start, I need to warn you, there will be magic. And this magic might harm you. I will come back to that at the end. What we'll do, well, we'll try to do, let's see how much it fits in this time. We will do auditing on GPA. We will see domain events, just a glimpse of that, how Spring helps us when we are going for a DDD style architecture. A bit of Java is validation, Spring data repositories, magic there. And then the second part, which is will be focused on transaction propagation and how transactions work with Hibernate. That's what we are planning to do. So let's just start. GPA auditing, what the heck is that? By the way, in the chat earlier, you can see a Git location and the branch name that you can check out, and you can see all the code that I'm writing over here. Now, very often, let me quickly run it through the idea of this application. It's a very simple Spring Boot application that if you run, it will, in a command line runner, will fire 2 methods, 1 and 2. Okay, and in this one method, right now what I'm doing, I am saving in a repository some magic. I'm saving some magic. Now, you might have seen, I'm just saying, you might have seen these kind of columns before. Created by, created time, less modified by. We just love these columns. They are so, right? We just love them. So how can Spring and Hibernate help us to do that? Actually, there is a way. We can do here created by, which is an annotation from Spring data annotation. So it's an integration from Spring, basically. Also created date, of course. And here, create less modified by who? And then less modified date. These are all the 4 annotations we can put. Now, the date is easy for Spring to resolve. And you might wonder, where does this kick in? It will kick in at the moment in which the GPA entity will be persisted with Hibernate. To make things as clear as possible, that would work if you enable this thing here. For just a second, I will comment this out. Actually, I will rename this for a second. I will get to that in a moment. So if you just have this entity class, the annotation entity listener will do the magic. This will link an GPA, basically a set of GPA hooks from Spring into the lifecycle of this entity. So what will happen is that just before saving, Hibernate will call into Spring. And Spring will resolve the creation date because I'm not persisting the entity. But let's also change it, shall we? We just persisted the magic. And what I will do next, I will get the magic from the database. Let me do a find by ID. I hope the ID is 1. And then if I get that, that should be some magic that I can update. Let's change the name, for example, new name. And I'll run this again, but before running, let us look at the output over here. Right now, nothing happens. Let's modify created by created time are still null in the inserts that Hibernate sends to the database. Why does this happen? Because I did not tell my Spring Boot application to care about that. I need here a enable GPA auditing. Let's run again. What will happen? Spring will be called by Hibernate. And when it is called, it will probably, I expect, set here the date, the current data, the current timestamp, really, in the created by. The next time I load the entity from the database right here in the second transaction, I will load the entity, change the name, and this will be automatically flushed to the database. That would mean that, let's see here. If I'm lucky, let's see here. The first transaction did what? Here, null, and then a timestamp. Now, this timestamp is created time and less modified time. Both of them were set when the entity was first persisted, but then later on, I should have a sleep in between, but it will be different. Let's see. 052 is the creation date. 193, very, very briefly after, it's the time that the entity was changed, you see? So the entities changed, and when it is changed, Spring set the current time in that column based on those hooks in GPA. Now, how about the create by the current user? How will that work? For Spring to resolve the current user, you need to give it a way to do that. And the way to do that is by registering in your application context a bean of type auditor aware, and then comes a type which will be used by Spring to fill up this thing. So if this is not a string, but maybe a long, then your auditor aware needs to return a long, of course. Right? If you are foreign keying to the user table, for example, by means of a long number. Which are the only two basic options, the best two options. And if that is so, I will see John Doe and John Doe in the created by and modified by, right? So this is one way, but this is not super fun. The moment in which it becomes super fun is when you have Spring security in place. Now that's interesting. Let's give it a try. I think it's already enabled, yes. And let me go to here and uncomment this class. And right now, I will run another test, and I will explain as it runs. What is this? It's an auditor aware, the same thing. But the difference is that it takes the current username from the security context holder. If you've been using Spring for a while, what you see here will be the currently logged in username. Okay, this is the flow to get the username from Spring, and then the test which fires the request into the Spring application with a mock user that has the username super user. This is Spring test library. You can fake the login here and call into your Spring application. What you will see, hopefully, I should see super user. Yes, super user being retrieved from the logged in user. From the logged in user. And I will commit this right now so you can play with it later on. It's called auditing plus Spring security. Good. Now, what is this ORM XML thing? In case you don't want to pollute all your entities with such a listener like I did over here, although you can inherit it from a superclass. But in case you don't want to repeat this everywhere, there is another way to do that. Unfortunately, I didn't find any other way than putting this ORM XML in place. This basically tells Hibernate to register this listener for everything, for every single entity out there in your application. So this will produce the same results, but without polluting this, without adding this annotation. Good. So this is GPA auditing. Okay, this is GPA auditing. Let me not domain events. Let's see. Is it still running? Yes, Mario progress bar. Yes, so good. Extremely important. The demo doesn't work if I don't have that Mario progress board. So yeah, integration between Spring and Hibernate. Let's commit this global setting with the same auditing stuff. Right, and hopefully, let's wait a second to see it working. Let's see. The next chapter will be a bit tricky to explain. Because it demands that you know stuff about architecture. It demands that you have heard about domain-driven design before. And if there's this world, a certain class of applications follows some principles, which tells to put more logic inside the methods in the entities that you manipulate. And we have Hibernate entities. So when you get to put logic like magic.perform, whenever someone calls this method, and let me call it for a second, here in the first transaction, after I create the magic, let me perform the magic. If you perform the magic, and this perform, you can imagine, inside the entity that has logic, at some point you might want to trigger additional execution to happen. But the execution that needs to be triggered by the magic being performed cannot be easily, cleanly implemented in this class. This is an entity. You can't put you can't send emails from an entity. Although I've just talked to a team that are using configurable. That's quite some magic. I didn't plan to configure this today. I heard about that. Quite some magic with bytecode instrumentation. I won't do that today. That would allow you in the entity to auto-wire stuff. Don't do that. But besides that, there is another thing we could try. You see, whenever this magic is performed, I need to trigger some changes in other aggregate routes, in other entities out there. Maybe even send messages over some email, I don't know. How would you do that? Well, you need to get out of the entity back to Spring. One way to do that is to rely on, let's say, domain event. Add a domain, which is a key technique in domain-driven design. If you implement DDD without domain event, you're missing 1/3 of the fun. This event over here is added to a transient list, which is then exposed to Spring using an annotation called domain event. Now, what the heck is this? This annotation, in this annotation, we'll make another listener in Spring. Actually, this is, in Spring, this one. This is in Spring, which whenever you persist the entity, or whenever you save the entity to a repository, like I do here, whenever you do, oops, right. This shouldn't work. You will see in a moment why. Let me refactor that. You need to do the save after you add. The save does the magic. The save will look up some methods annotated with domain events, take those domain events and fire them into Spring as Spring events. But for this to happen, you need to do the save after the perform. So right now, after I changed this, an event of this type will be fired in Spring. You can register yourself to listen to that event like this. You can say event listener. Let me check if I don't have it already. No, yeah, it is here. I have an event listener that after the magic happens, and this is the event which is thrown by Spring, it is a Spring event. Event listener is from Spring. This event will be dispatched here into a domain service, into a service, and you can do whatever you like from here. You can send emails, you can cascade changes to other aggregates, and so on and so on. So that's why you see here magic happen. So for this magic for the events to be published, what needs to happen is that you call a save passing this instance as an argument. The save will look up this method by annotation, get the events from that list, and fire them into Spring. Now that would basically, that's why this domain event is a transient property. It will never be persisted in the database. It's just there for Spring to get it. Okay, but there are pitfalls. There are big pitfalls with this, and let me show you some of them. One of them is if you take some magic from the database, and on that magic you perform. If you do that, you notice there is no save after that. But despite the fact there is no save, you can see that there is an update instruction happening. Why is there an update? Because I got the magic object from the repository within a transaction. We will get to transactions a bit later. In this transaction, no matter what I do to the object, to the entity instance, the entity, since it is attached, that's what we say, the changes I do to that instance will be flushed in the database. That's why you see this update over here, persisting the change, that the name equals new name. So it is called auto-flushing. So you might rely on this behavior, in which case you don't save at the end of the flow. You just let the changes auto-flush to the database. The problem is that if you're using domain events, the domain events never get published. You see, there is nothing in the to method. There are no events are fired in here. You need to do save over here. But on the other hand, I saw teams which were quite against working with open transactions. We're quite against this behavior of auto-flushing the dirty entity into the database. They saw it like a bad thing, and they dropped using transactional, and basically they had to do save at the end to perform this. And if you do save at the end, then you're safe again. However, it doesn't feel right. I mean, if you just move these two lines, if you swap these two lines, the event is not sent anymore. And that's why most teams that are trying to fire events from aggregates today, what I saw them doing, is not using Spring domain events, but instead relying on sort of a static publisher. Let me show you how it's done. Brief sketching the idea. You don't add to a list. By the way, if you see, the magic had happened in the to section. Feel free to redo all this following what I did after. It will help you a lot. Instead of accumulating event for Spring to take, what people do is event publisher holder. But it's my class from here. Dot get event publisher, and then this one will publish the new magic happened event of this name. They will use most of the time a static trick, that's a static method to publish events back to Spring. So, and there is a discussion here about how do you test that at some point. But let's not get there. The idea is that one way in which events can be fired is with domain events. The other way is via some static trick, and I'll let you inspect this one later if you want. And Spring event publisher. Let me show you the copy if you want to freeze the recording later. So back in the service, another thing that kicks in is this event listener thing, which Spring basically can dispatch events based on type to whoever is interested, and there can be multiple magic happened. Wow, right? There can be multiple registered listeners to the same event. It will be sent to both of them. Now, let's see the listener, the first listener we had, it persisted another magic. So whenever the event happened, it persisted one more magic. That's why you see here an insert again. Not here, sorry, but here, insert into magic. You see multiple inserts happening, but by the way, there are a bit too many. Wait a second, something is wrong. I shouldn't see that many inserts. Let me just check one thing. So this is save, all right? So I'm just saving one thing. Something is strange. Anyway, this magic happened over here, triggered another thing to happen, but that thing that happened in the same transaction. And that's something that you might not want. Now, by the book, domain-driven design says to process the events in separate transactions. If you want that, you can get the behavior by just putting here transactional event listener, which by default runs after the commit of the transaction in which the events were published. Again, someone publishes events within a transaction. After that transaction is done, another transaction will be opened in which this other magic will be persisted. And that will be visible in the log in a second. Here, there's a commit. And then where the heck is the save? Did I save? Yes. Where is the reversed? Just a second. Don't see it. So transaction event listener after magic. Okay. I see the magic happened, but I don't see the persist. Let's try one more thing. Transactional again. Let's drop this. One more chance. If it doesn't work, I don't really care. I'll move to the next one. The next one will be validation, which is quite easy to do. But let's give it one more try. So this is doing the following. After the transaction in which the events are published, another transaction is opened that will commit the second one. Let's see. Did it work this time? I don't see it really. I don't see the persistence happening. The reversed. I don't see the reversed. Maybe I'm missing something. Or maybe, let's see, there can be one more trick here. 2 seconds. No. I don't see the reversed one. Strange. Repo.save of this magic. Transaction is a listener. I wonder if this is... Doesn't really matter, because again, by the way, if you look in the history, that would work. So transactions firing after the completion of the previous transaction. Just a second. Everything is not right with my environment. I can't fix it. Anyway, let's move to the next one. Validation. What is with validation? Let's see. Imagine that in this magic, you do not want to have magic with null names. There are multiple ways of achieving this. You can first change the schema column, for example, and you can say here nullable equals false, which will make the column become not null, which will stop you to persist the data. That will be one trick, but it's in the database. But if you want, for example, to enforce like a minimum length, you can do this with, for example, size. I think size, yes. You can say the minimum size is equal to. What this means is that you are not allowed to persist magic with a name less than 2 characters. Size is from JavaX validation. If you just put this here, then you try to persist. Let's try to persist over here a magic with a single character as a name. If you just do that, Hibernate, when it will persist the entity, it automatically checks for all these annotations from JavaX validation. And there can be very interesting ones, like pattern, for example, like with a regex pattern. So a lot of stuff over here, including not null. Okay, not null. So many annotations that are automatically checked by Hibernate just before you persist or you change any entity in there. So right now there is a constraint violation that the size must be between 2 and whatever. Okay, so the length of the name is too short. Okay, so that's JavaX validation. What else do we have? Yeah, Spring Data repository. That's quite interesting. Now, one of the things which gives you most, let's say, which is quite shocking when you start working with Spring deeply and you run into these Spring Data Jpa repositories. First thing that scares you is that there is an interface with no implementation in your code, and you see what the heck is the implementation. It's actually generated by Spring. As you know, you can put query methods over here, but I want to, let's put a query method, for example, query, and let's say public. You just need to get one magic out of the magic, get by name. Similar, let's pretend, and I will say here, for example, string name path, and this query is a GPQL query. You can say from magic, right? Where name like, and you can say like, for example, I think this concatenated with name path, which is the first argument, concatenated with another. And I hope that would work. For some reason, it should work. Okay, so this is a query method that is generated automatically by Spring based on this query. You can also write get, but you know what? I think you all know that really. Let's call this method. I want to show something new that you might not know. Let's call this method over here. So here, for example, you can do a repo.getName, get by name similar, and then here you say the name part. Let's search for just name, which is contained in this string above. What will happen? Repo get by name similar. Okay. Let's see if it first works, and then, oh, I have a problem. I need to fix this. Longer name. And this will basically create under the hood a query with Hibernate, setting the arguments, everything for it. Let's see first if it works before moving forward. Come on, Spring. And do I find it? I should have, I should see the select over here. Select, like, perfect. The query was sent to the database. I will print the result. But then, let's try something strange. Let's not find the name. What would you get back? You will get a null. You will get back a null from this query because there is no magic with a name like that stuff. And null is something very ugly in Java. We had a long history of pain related to null. That's why the find by ID method itself, it changed in Spring Boot, in Spring Data 2.0 to optional magic, because we want to avoid working with nulls. Nulls are bad. Nulls are very bad. So how do we work around that? How can you make sure that null is out of our... I will create something very strange now. I will create a packaging for Java. What? What is that? Not non-null API. I will annotate the package in which the repository interfaces are placed with this annotation that will tell Spring that no method in that interface is ever allowed to return a null. But then if you don't return null, what do you do? If something might not return results, so right now, instead of a null, I get an exception. I get an exception saying that, wait a second, result must not be null. So if you really want to get something null from there, your only way is to do that. That would work. But that's it. There is no other way around that. Okay. So what do we learn? Optionals are good. Requires that was the magic, not null API in the package in which your interfaces, your JPA repositories are located. Good. Now, regarding optional, there is another discussion around. Regarding exactly what I showed you in this magic service, when you find by ID, and you know the ID for sure, then I met many developers that believe that are annoyed by the fact that find by ID returns you an optional. They were like, why is it an optional? I mean, what would I do? And you know what they end up doing? Every time they do find by ID, they continue with or else throw. This is like an idiom. Or they are doing this every single time. And they are angry about that. Because why do I have to do the same thing over and over? I know that this ID is there. Why do you force me to pollute my code with this? And when they reached that point, they said, wait a second, I would love to have another method in this interface, which doesn't give me an optional, but gives me either the entity or it throws. In other words, I want to encapsulate all this and to make it part of the GPA or all the GPA repositories, all of them. So I want to change basically the GPA repository in Spring. But it turns out that there's actually a solution for that, which is to make it, to create your own custom GPA repository, like this. If you open it, it extends from GPA repository. It's right here in my code base. It is my extension, which adds exactly what I mentioned. Find one by ID, which throws exception when the ID is not found in database. Now, this has to have an implementation, and it does. It's here. And there is some wiring up that you need to do, which is this factory bean that you need to register with Spring. If I recall correctly, you need to go here and to say enable GPA repositories and specifying something like factory. Let's see. Repository factory bean class. Sounds correct. Custom GPA repository factory bean. And I hope I did not make it. Don't do any mistake. And if that would work, then I would be able to go here, and instead of doing this, to directly get the data from the database by calling find one by ID 1L. Okay, so I just expanded the repository default interface with one more method with an implementation manually crafted over here. Good. Okay. What's next about repositories? Well, probably you all know that if you want to implement some methods manually, really working with Entity Manager manually, then the recommended way is to create another interface here, which is called, let's say, Magic Repo custom, right? In which to define the method that you like. Typically, that method kind of sounds like this: search by some criteria. This is what you typically have in this Magic repository custom. For simplicity, allow me to pass here just a string criteria, just to simulate the idea. And this repository custom will be implemented for real with a class, Magic Repo Immutable, which will implement Magic Repo custom, implementing the missing piece. And in that thing, you can inject whatever you want: auto-wired, entity manager. And this is something you typically do for what we call dynamic queries. That query that starts with entity manager.create query, and then you add arguments to that, and then dynamically add where conditions. And it's something I did a lot of time. But this is okay. This is cool. This is interesting. By the way, this will crash, I think. Empty list. Empty list. Come on. Thank you. Good. This is interesting, but there is one more thing I want to show you regarding Spring repositories. Let me have a look at this one. Or maybe better, let me directly throw you in the... It's called specification executor. What the heck is that? Magic. And I will add one more to the party, which is query DSL. These are the two ways these two things allow you to use two competing technologies to build dynamic queries. Let me sketch the idea. First of all, you have to have in your POM some Maven plugins that will generate code. I'm talking about code generation things that are producing for me code right here in the generated sources. You see in one part the query DSL, the other part is the meta model from JPA. I'll explain. Right now, after I made my repository implement those executors, what I can do is to go to my service and, for example, write something like repo. Find all that. See if I expect that are created between now. This is the start date. Now minus 1 year, and now. What is this created between? It's something that produces you a specification. Specification is again something from Data Jpa. A specification is based on the infamous criteria API. And this basically creates a chunk of GPQL, a small portion of GPQL, which translates into a between operator and the two arguments that you give. These are translated later on by Spring into, actually by Hibernate, into a GPQL and then into SQL, which is run in the database. The benefit of all this is that you can very easily mix them. For example, or and. You can chain them together. You can work with these predicates, basically, right in your domain code. This is no longer something to put in a repository. This reads good enough so that you can actually manipulate those into your business logic. That's the benefit. And that's, I will note here, that's the specification plus GPA meta model. The other technology, which does pretty much the same thing, is query DSL. Some like it more, but it's up to you. It goes like this. You go from This time, you don't need some additional methods created here with great pain and sorrow. These are very hard to write, really. Quite hard. But however, with query DSL, it looks like this. I need a magic. Let me magic. I think it's just Q magic at the beginning, dot magic. A magic which has the created time dot between, oh my God, how good this looks. Now, minus year 1 and now. And all of that and Q magic. Let's see if I can get this straight. Magic dot create, not created time, but name, let's say, like, oh my God. You have like, yes. And then you say this and name and this. And this is very, very, I mean, if you know maybe link you from C#, it goes in that style, in a sense. Of course, you will import the magic statically. Where is my, the code just disappeared? Oh no, here. Doesn't go for some reason. But the point is, you can build dynamic queries, chaining things together right here in front of, in the middle of your domain without being ashamed of the code that you wrote. All right, so we didn't get to talk about transaction propagation, but we did see the others. So let me summarize what we saw. Created by, created date. Yes, it's type safe indeed. Last modified by, last modified date. These rely on some hooks in GPA, in which Spring hooks up and fires back into the Spring context. Now, these hooks in Hibernate, you define either by entity listener annotation on the entity or globally via ORM. And then the user to put here by is fetched from an auditor aware. And in a real case scenario, this is fetched from Spring security session, from the security context holder, like I showed you right now. Then domain-driven events, which is a bit tricky. Not all the projects need that. There are some pitfalls over here. In case you don't save, in case you rely on auto flashing on the entities, these might get lost. So in order to avoid getting losing them, one way is to have here a static event publisher, like it's now on Git. It did propagate the event, but for some reason the transaction didn't work for the second. These events that you fire into Spring are then dispatched to interested event listeners, to any method that is annotated with event listener. It can run the handling in the same transaction or in a different one after the current transaction with transactional event listener. Okay, this is what we saw briefly. Then we saw Java is validation. We put not null, size, pattern, and even you can actually have validators, custom validators, which are loaded from Spring or Spring Beans, and there's a link over there, right? And then we saw Spring Data repositories, and we saw that besides the finder methods and the query methods in customer repository, and besides those that are inherited from GPA repository, what we can do, we can inherit from another custom interface that we implement separately. Like I sketched over here. Okay, I sketched over here. No, this one. This. Okay, this is what I meant. So you can actually have a separate interface with methods that you really implement. But then this is quite standard. But what you can do additionally, and I think many projects with benefit from that, is to define another intermediary and to enhance the standard API with more stuff custom for your application. Like I did this, find exactly one. Besides that, I also mentioned GPA specification and query DSL, the two technology that would allow you to build dynamic queries without getting your hands dirty to work with query and with GPA directly within the entity manager. That provide a higher level abstraction over querying. And also we mentioned Null API, which blocks any method in a repository to return null. You will have to return optional. We didn't have time to go to transactions, unfortunately, but yeah, maybe the next one. That's kind of it. That's kind of it. One last word here. In case you decide to use any of this magic, please make sure that the entire team understands it. Please write a short prototype, experiment a bit. Do not just use it blindly. Never. Never use it blindly. Make sure everyone understands it. You can get burned. You can get burned by this. Thanks. Thank you. In case you have questions, I think there is 1 minute or something for some questions. In case you want to reach me out afterwards, tweet me, best way, or on my website you can find the mail. You can ask whatever questions you have. That's kind of it. I tried to cover the integration points. See you on Friday at spaghetti. Okay, see you Friday. Thanks, folks. Yeah, I'm over and out.
Thanks a lot for this high-speed presentation. It took me all the concentration I had to keep up, but wow.
Yeah.
So if there's any questions, now's the time. We're out of time, actually, but if there's a question, we'll just make time. And if not, thanks again for this awesome presentation. For all the attendees, this was the last parallel session for today. You might want to hop back to the lobby for the central ending of JSpring. Well, thanks again. Have a good one. Victor, thanks. And
thank you.
See you in the conference. And everyone else, have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yes, the slides I will share on social media this evening. In case you want the slides, I will post them on Twitter this evening. Bye.
Awesome. Thanks again. Bye.
Bye.